Hi everyone, James Pura here, one of the product marketing managers for MSC Software. I'm joined by Mitch Muncy, product manager for MSC Apex, and we're here to give you the official What's New presentation for the latest release of MSC Apex 2021.1, which came out a couple of weeks ago on April 5th, 2021. As a reminder, this is the official What's New video, and it's about 30 minutes long. So if you're looking for a shorter, more condensed version that just hits the highlights of this release, we have an accompanying video that is only about 5 minutes long, and it's called the Highlight Reel video, which you can find on YouTube and on our website. Here's what we're going to talk about today. We'll start with an introduction to who we are and a high-level overview of how customers are using Apex today. Then we'll get into the new stuff with this release, starting with the user interface, then geometry and meshing, and then interoperability with MSC Nastran. And that will pretty much round out our intro to all the new tech in pre-processing. Then we'll jump to post-processing, focus specifically on our increased support for MSC Nastran solution sequences. Then we'll finish off by talking about the Python API and the new and improved Apex utilities, which includes for the first time how multiple Apex users can work on the same model all at the same time, including some other new and exciting technologies. Okay, so let's jump right into it. The voice that you're hearing today is the guy on the right. This is James Pura. I'm the product marketing manager for MSC Apex, and here's my email. You can shoot me a note if you want. And I'm joined by Mitch Muncy, Senior Product Manager for MSC Apex, who wants to say a few words. Mitch?
Thank you, James. After the 2021 release in December, this is our first big release of the year. So James will show you there's lots of really new features from top to bottom, and we can't wait to get into all of it, especially some of the new pressure and temperature mapping capabilities we're exposing through the new scripting utilities that we added in that past release. As always, we're looking for your feedback, so please reach out to us or join us in one of our upcoming betas. With that, I'll hand it back over to James.
All right, so let's talk about how Apex is being used today by people just like you. Today, MSC Apex is really used for like 5 key areas of simulation. The first one is for geometry, and it's not just geometry cleanup, but geometry repair, geometry creation, even defeaturing, and revolve, extrude, sweep, and lofting. These are, Apex has really a geometry kernel built into it, and it can be used not for as a replacement for a CAD system, but really for the simulation engineer that needs to create and edit geometry on the fly in order to make a better simulation model or maybe refine your mesh. Apex's geometry capabilities are first class, and our customers worldwide are recognizing this, and so this is how customers are using it. Now, customers are also using Apex for our world-class meshing technologies, including the generative updates, so that the link with geometry is when you edit the geometry, the mesh goes along for the ride, and the mesh not only changes to the geometry changes, but it also optimizes to the new geometry changes. So every time you make a geometry change, Apex runs through a little algorithm. It doesn't matter what type of mesh that you create, whether it be solid hex, solid tets, 2D shell, 1D beam, doesn't matter. Apex will optimize to the new geometry, and customers love it. Apex is also used for design trade-off studies. So early on in the design phase, you might be creating a new aerospace vehicle, a new automotive component or vehicle. You might be creating a new electronics component or a bicycle or something like that. All of these have been done by MSC Apex customers today, and you can do conceptual design trade-off studies faster than any other tool out there. And that is because of the built-in solver that we have inside of Apex. You can do integrated analysis checks, whether it be for at the component level or the subsystem or even the full system level, and you can do a full design trade-off study. So that's how customers are using that for end-to-end. Well, what if you're not in the conceptual design phase? What if you're in the certification phase, whether you need to certify a new aircraft or certify a new automobile? Maybe you're working on a new electronics component that you're working on, and you need to get out the door, and you need to analyze for certification. And MSC Nastran is the perfect solver for that tool, for that job. And it doesn't matter whether you're working with geometry or whether you're working with an orphan mesh. Really, if you're certifying with MSC Nastran and you're doing that final analysis, customers really love using Apex for this job. Okay. Now, let's talk about the new functionality coming out in this release. This is a high-level overview of basically everything that we're about to talk about, okay? So I'm not going to go through each and every bullet point, but for those of you that maybe want to skip to a certain section of the video, this is kind of your guideline for this, okay? Now, these are the test models and demos available, as well as the ones that I'm actually going to show you a live demo of, or a recorded demo of, in this recording. Now, everything in white here, you can see that we have demos available. It's just that we didn't have time to fit it into this video recording. So, but if something in white that I'm not going to demo to you today that you want a full demo of, contact your local MSC software support engineer or application engineer or even account manager and say, hey, you know, the Apex guy talked about this demo that I really want to see. Please set up a demo, and someone on our team would be happy to oblige you for that. Okay. Now, let's move on to the next section, which is really the crux of why we're here, which is what new technology is available in Apex 2021.1. Let's start with the user interface and user experience. Okay, the first thing that I'm going to talk about is the new display selected entities in selection stage buttons, which is really a mouthful. At the end of the day, on certain tools, you've probably noticed that there are these orange boxes that show, you know, step 1, select this, step 2, select that, step, you know, and when you selected it, sure, it was nice to see the little orange box highlight from 1 to 2, but it didn't really tell you what you clicked on. And now we have fixed that in certain tools now, and you can see examples of this where, for instance, the element orientation tool, if you click on nodes and elements, it'll say element 44 selected, or 95 2D elements selected. And then in the transform tool, here's an example as well, just giving you more immediate feedback on what it is you're actually clicking on, so that if in case you make a mistake, you have that immediate feedback and you know that you can go back and fix it. Also new in the user interface is co-located construction markers. Now, this is something that is an improvement on the magic marker functionality that came out a few releases ago. Kind of like when you want to split a surface using the midpoint of an edge. And let's say a node or a geometric point doesn't exist on that edge, and you want to just hover over that edge and click on it. Well, sometimes there are co-located construction markers, as you can see here. Things like midpoints or endpoints or centroids or arc centers or cylindrical axis midpoint. And sometimes Apex can get confused, or the user can get confused on which one they're actually selecting. And so if 2 or more of these exist in the same area,
For the first demo, let's take a look at the
and you
co-located
click on it,
construction
then
markers.
Apex will give you
Previously,
the option to
if you were
choose
using
either
a
A or
tool
B
that
or C
needed
or
to
D.
choose a point, a
Okay.
construction marker
And
would
here's an
show up.
example of that.
You can see that here using the split tool. On a surface, if I wanted to choose the midpoint, all I would have to do is hover over the edge and the midpoint would show up. The problem here, though, was that if there was more than one construction marker at any one location, the user couldn't choose which one they wanted. That's now fixed, and in Apex 2021.1, you can select which specific construction marker you want at a specific location. Let's see it in action using the Measure Distance tool. If we hover over the surface here, we can select which one we want, and this works on cylinders and curves as well. All right, so the next section, let's talk about geometry and meshing. The first thing that let's talk about is a new CAD format that we supported inside of MSC Apex, which is the Dassault 3D Experience geometry file format, which is 3D XML. So this is imported as 2 different ways. You can actually import it with either of the options. The option 1 is with authoring, and option 2 is for review. Now, what's the difference between the two? Well, at the end of the day, it's file size. The for review option is really just importing it and looking at it. Okay, so if you want to use Apex and import something and just look at the model and you don't want to change anything or interrogate it or mesh it or anything like that,
then the for review option is for you. For everybody else that you're actually going to build a simulation model with, you want to choose the with authoring format, okay? And it'll come in with all the surfaces and points and locations and parts and assembly tree and all that stuff. Now, the trade-off there is obviously you get a bigger file size because you're importing all of that metadata along with it, okay? And it takes a little bit longer too. But with the longer wait, you get a better reward. The next item is mesh failure diagnostics. Now, in past versions of Apex, if you've ever tried to mesh a really dirty piece of geometry, and if you click on this dirty piece of geometry and it fails to mesh, the best that you could hope for in previous releases is a little status message that says solid mesh failed. And you're like, great, Apex, well, thanks for telling me something that I already knew, because I tried the mesh thing and the mesh didn't show up. So great, awesome. Well, in the latest version of Apex, you actually have a diagnostic tool that automatically kicks in whenever that happens. So now it'll actually tell you why the geometry failed. And I'm actually going to give you a demo of this because this is just really cool. Now, the geometry meshing also had an improvement where shell meshing had a performance increase, and you can see here that by default, the use mesh flow optimization is checked, and you can see an example of before and after. Clearly, because of this performance increase, you have a much better mesh that molds to the geometry curves and surfaces. And this is just through just incremental improvement of Apex, and we were very proud of this, and so we decided to really call it out in this presentation and let you guys know that we're not letting shell mesh fall by the wayside here. We are incrementally improving that, just like everything else inside of Apex. Now, along those same lines, we have also improved and listened to our customers who requested this new technology, which is I want quads only on the boundary. Okay, I want Apex to optimize all the rest of the mesh, but I want an all quad boundary mesh. And thus we have that ability. Now it is off by default, but you can check it and you can use it. Now, also geometry and meshing are, for those of you that are doing generative design and topology optimization, maybe using MSC Apex generative design or elsewhere, we have a improved meshing robustness of these organic shapes. Now, none of the meshing algorithms that were originally released inside of Apex were designed to support all of these organic shapes. So a lot of work has gone into improving all of these meshing algorithms in order to support this new technology. And you can see here inside of application settings, you go to meshing and you check the box that says optimize meshing for organic shapes if this is what you do a lot of. And Apex's solid meshing and surface meshing will optimize for those organic shapes. Okay. Now, here's an example of the incremental improvement that we've done just under the hood in terms of just importing the exported geometry out of Apex Generative Design. Let's say you're doing topology optimization and you want to jump immediately into meshing. The next step after doing that is to bring in that optimized geometry so that you can actually slice it up and create a mesh. Well, that automatic slicing and the importing technology has gone through a vast improvement, and we're not done yet. You can see an example in the bottom right of what we're planning on doing in future releases, but and that's kind of the end state goal of nice and clean, those 90-degree angles and everything imports and meshes nicely. But it was a vast improvement on what we had before, and so we wanted to call it out here during this presentation.
So for the next demo, let's go back and talk about that new
topology optimization
diagnostics tool,
and let's see it
jump into Apex
we've got our
Modeler
V8
for,
engine here.
Meshing.
You will see
if we try to mesh it right out of the gate,
in
it
terms
fails,
of
and
STL
we can
facet
see
body
why.
and
Apex
creating
immediately
NURBS
zooms
geometry.
to the faulty location, and we can then use the geometry edit tools to clean it up.
Here, we're deleting a bad surface and recreating it using the filler tool. Then we'll attempt to mesh again, and this time it takes us to the next faulty location. So we'll do the same thing again here and fix it by defeaturing some surfaces. Then finally, we'll try to mesh it one last time, and you can see here now we have a completed mesh. All right, let's talk about the next section, and let's round out the whole pre-processing part, and then we'll jump into post-processing. So section 4, let's talk about MSC Nastran interoperability.
The first one is importing of beams with variable properties. Okay, so this is also an incremental improvement because, as you know, we support 1D beams inside of Apex, and we've been improving it over the last couple of releases. And in this new one, if you have, say, a legacy Nastran bulk data file, BDF, and it has these variable beam properties, Apex now supports it. Maybe you have variable thicknesses, maybe you have variable offsets. Apex can import that legacy data, and it should look, it will look exactly as intended. Okay. In previous versions, we did not have this type of variable property support, and so Apex would throw an error. Not anymore. Now you have the ability to click on the field, and you can actually see both a chart and a tabular collection of what these properties are, and then visual representation as well. A new connector is now supported inside of MSC Apex. We have gap elements. Now, for those of you that don't know what gap elements are, this is not going to be a big deal. This is probably something that you use something else for. Maybe you use Nastran Solution 400. Maybe you use some other capability. But for those of you that have legacy Nastran models that use gap elements, Apex now supports the creation and importing of these element types. Okay, so you go to the connector panels, same thing as if you were to create a C-bush or a spring or a damper or a flexible link or anything like that. It's all in the same tool, and you click on the very last one, which is a gap element. Now, the cool part is, just like everything else, gap elements have their unique glyph, so that when you create it inside of Apex, you'll immediately get that feedback and that visual feedback, and you'll see what a gap element looks like when you get it created. And we are now supporting that just like every other connector. Now, one little caveat to this is that gap elements do not work in the integrated solver. So this is basically an MSC Nastran technology that MSC Nastran users now have GUI support for pre-post capability. Now, this is if you are a legacy Nastran user for maybe Sol 106 or Sol 400. And you use gap elements, you're probably jumping for joy right now, because this has been a long-standing request from our worldwide customers, and we're very proud to deliver it to you now. Another long-standing request is for those of you that do composites, where you do honeycomb core with composite face sheets on top and bottom, or maybe just top or maybe just bottom, doesn't matter. But Apex now supports the modeling of this via anisotropic materials. Okay, so on the Create Materials tab, you have the ability to create 3D anisotropic materials, and you can see here what that turns into in terms of MSC Nastran. For our Nastran customers, this should feel very familiar to you, and you now have this ability to create these sandwich panels inside of Apex. The next one is another long-standing request, which is variable pressure, and the next one, which is variable temperature and variable pressure. So both of these are now supported inside of Apex. Now, the caveat here is that in this release, it is API support only. And so what we did is we developed our own Apex utility that allows this to work. Now, core Apex GUI support will come in a future release for spatially varying temperatures and pressures. But for now, you'll go to the Apex utility if you're creating a variable pressure or variable temperature, or on the pressure tool, if you want to just create it, you can create a variable pressure, or on the temperature tool, you can create it using the variable tool here. Now, so if you're applying the spatially varying pressures to your model, that's where you need to go to the API. Okay. Okay, so for this next demo, we're going to show you the new capability that we have in Apex, where we can map a variable pressure or temperature field onto an existing finite element model. First, let's take temperature. Here you can see a simple electronics module, and we're going to map temperature loads from an Excel CSV file onto it and then run it. Just a quick note here, though, the temperature and pressure mapping tool is delivered as an Apex utility, which you can see here. So make sure you've got the utilities loaded before starting this workflow. Here you can see the CSV file, where we've got 4 columns, X, Y, Z, and temperature. Next, we're going to choose Select Target and choose the FEA model that we imported. Then to finish it off, we can hit Create Load, and that'll complete the operation. And then, as you can see now, we've got a variable temperature load applied to our model, which we can visualize. Now, let's do the same thing, but with variable pressure load. Let's say just for kicks, you're working on a new aircraft design, and either you or someone on your team just completed a CFD analysis on your new aircraft model. The next step is you would probably take that output from the CFD analysis and map it onto your FEA model in order to do a full structural analysis, maybe an internal loads or something like that, thus being able to certify your new aircraft design. So that's the workflow we're going to do here. The CFD analysis in this case was done using Cradle SC Flow, and here's the exported CSV file that you can see here. You can see that we've got XYZ temperature and pressure, or actually just XYZ and pressure. Nothing too special, so it should work with our CFD codes also like other codes like Fluent or Star CCM+. But here we've got our CAD model, and we've also got our CSV file export. Now we're going to import this just like we did before and apply that variable pressure load onto the aircraft, which we've already meshed. We can preview it before we create the load just to make sure, and then yes, it looks good. So now let's just create the load, and we're ready to move forward with our full structural analysis. Okay, so now let's jump into post-processing. The first one that I'm going to bring up is an enhancement that we've made to our shear, bending, moment, and torque charting capabilities. Here, users can now compare multi-scenario responses using 2D chart and accumulate mode, and you can also click the export all function. We have a new button that it has the ability to export all curves in the chart into a single CSV file. So if you want to do post-processing on your post-processing and you want to open up Excel and manipulate the data that way, you can do that now. In frequency response dynamics, we had a major enhancement here, which has been requested for quite a while, which customers love the fact that Apex does frequency response dynamics analysis, but the one piece that we were missing is the Nastran Solution 111 support, where you can import a fully run Nastran run using Solution 111 and visualize and post-process that data. That gap is now closed. You can import a Nastran Solution 111 deck, whether it be HDF5 or OP2, and it will you can post-process those results inside of Apex now. Yeah, another gap that's closed is the ability to post-process a C-bush. You now have the ability to visualize and do a force balance inside of MSC Apex, and you can visualize and post-process both in the exploded view, which is just really cool, or in the normal view, where you can post-process these bushings and find the connector forces inside of it. And again, that works for HDF5 and OP2 as well. The next one is a big new technology, which is we're just now beginning the baby steps of supporting nonlinear analysis inside of Apex. Solution 106 and Solution 400 static nonlinear results, you can now import those results inside of MSC Apex. So you can import these nonlinear steps inside of these static scenario events. And while Apex supports some results, it doesn't support everything. So the unrecognized results will come in, and you can see the example of the things that Apex doesn't recognize, and it will throw an error, and you'll be able to visually review those upon import. All right, so let's see that Solution 111 in action here, which is really cool. So here, let's look at what we had a couple of years ago when we introduced frequency response for the very first time, which allowed users to do design trade-off studies without ever leaving the user interface. Here you can see a section of the What's New video that we published back in 2016, where we introduced the world to Apex FOSA. The demo that we showed back then walked through how to look at the dynamic signature, find an anomaly that we needed to fix, do a what-if study on that, and then once we figured out what to change, we could go back to Apex, which you can see here. We can add a stiffener to reduce the resonant frequency, and then rerun to verify our new design. Okay, so now let's take it one step further and let's play with that new technology that we have inside of Apex 2021.1. In this exact same scenario, let's assume that we've finalized our design and we need to certify the new aircraft design by using MSC Nastran as the solver on record. With MSC Apex 2021.1, we have added the ability to do a full pre-post analysis on a Nastran frequency response analysis, which is also referred to as a Solution 111 deck. So let's take that Apex model that we had before, we export an MSC Nastran Solution 111 deck, and then let's run it externally. Here, I've cut to the end so that we don't have to wait for it to solve, and we can import that HDF5 result. Okay, and there you go. And then finally, let's talk about collaboration and the MSC Apex API and utilities updates. So the first one is, let's talk about what happens when you have 2 or 3 or 4 engineers all working on different components of one full assembly model. Okay, let's say just for kicks, this is a drone model. Let's say somebody's working on the top arms. Let's say someone's working on the legs, and someone's working on the middle electronics module. Now, all 3 of those Apex models can be imported into one Apex model, or you can import 2 into the third one if you want, however you want to do it. Now, this is only currently supported using the API, just like the map spatial loads data for variable pressure and temperature. Okay, so this is baby steps. We will be incrementally improving it and releasing it inside of the core GUI functionality in a later release. But we thought that it was a pretty huge improvement, and we wanted to release it to the world and let you guys use it. And so we shipped it with a new API called Import Apex, which you can see here is on the utilities menu. So let's see it in action. Okay. So on the new Apex Utilities menu, and specifically, let's look at the Apex import capability here. So let's go down to right there, the interoperability button, the 4th one down. Okay, so here's our drone, and we look at the full assembly, and let's go into the Import Apex functionality. Okay, so now let's click on Browse, and we see Model 1. Okay, so there's Model 2, and then here's Model 3. Now let's go into a blank Apex, and let's import all 3 of these models. So here's the housing plates, here's the lower frame, and then here is the upper frame. Okay, and just like that, we have a fully connected model that we can then connect each one of them together and then run it, just like as if we created the model from scratch inside of one Apex session. All right, so for the final section, let's talk about the API extensions and the Python improvements that we've made inside of customization and automation for Apex. So we now support geometry, location, and orientation API. So if you find yourself needing to snap to a certain orientation or a certain part or a certain zoomed in view of a part, you can create your own custom view using this new capability, geometry, location, and orientation. We also have support for new selection stages inside of custom tools. Okay, so previously this was something that was missing inside of tools like the split tool here, you can see, where if you wanted to build a script that walked the user through choosing the different selection stages, you were unable to do that. And now inside of the Apex API, you do, and you can support that. Another one is regions. Now, you may be thinking, scratching your head, regions. Now, this seems oddly familiar, and you would be right, especially if you're a Patran user. I'm going to focus your eyes down to this bottom bullet point here, which is regions will be used in a future release to support functionality similar to Patran groups. So if you guys or girls are using Patran right now and you really want to use Apex, but that one piece of technology that was missing was support for Patran groups, well, we have taken the incremental baby step of supporting this inside of the API. Now, core Apex GUI support for this will come at a later release, but again, we thought that it was so critically important that we release this technology so that Apex regions is now supported, and you can create custom collections of things like cells and faces and edges and vertex and surfaces and nodes and elements, All that good stuff is now supported inside of the Apex API. Now we also have a view. View manipulation API that we currently released, which you can position the camera in 3D space and you can orient the camera. You can define the focal point and change the scale and all that good stuff. And then finally, we have the ability to support Mark and Mentat. Now, a lot of you think that Apex is just an MSC Nastran tool. It is definitely not. It was always designed to support multiple solvers from a pre-post perspective, especially the ones internally here at MSC Software. And we are very proud to say that we have now shipped Apex 2021.1 with the ability to jump directly from Apex into Mark Mentat. Now, this only supports things like nodes and elements right now. It does not support all of the nonlinear capabilities that Mark and Mentat have now. But again, baby steps. We're just getting started here with this new solver support inside of Apex. But it supports some of the biggest pain points, which is geometry and meshing. Things like geometry cleanup, things like editing surfaces and splitting and cutting and meshing. All of these things are somewhat painful inside of Legacy Mentat today, and Mark and Mentat customers have been very jealous of our Nastran customers that have been taking advantage of these Apex capabilities up until now. And now we have the ability to export this directly out of Apex in a native Mark DAT file that goes directly into Mentat. And then you can finish the workflow by applying your loads and constraints and running inside of Mark. So let's see that in real life in demo form. So here we're going to go to the interoperability tools. We're going to click on Export Mark, okay? And here we've got our landing gear model. We've linked both of these tools together, both Apex and Mark. And when you're ready to move from Apex over to Mark, let's say you have a finished loads and you have a finished mesh and geometry's all cleaned up, you can, all you have to do is define the file path for the DAT file, and it'll export the native Mark DAT file. And if I have the checkbox checked for Run Mentat inside of Apex, then it'll automatically open Mentat also and import the model that I just exported out of Apex. Okay, so I've only scratched the surface here when it comes to the new Apex Utilities menu. Okay, so have fun exploring a lot of these very fun and useful tools. All right, so in summary, what did we just show you? In the last 30 minutes or so, we've talked about improved selection stage buttons. We've talked about improved construction markers. We supported the new 3D Experience at 3D XML file format. We also have a new mesh failure diagnostics tool with immediate feedback on what went wrong with your geometry that prevented the mesher from running. We also have shell meshing and the ability to have all quads on the boundary now inside of the 2D shell meshing tool. And then an improved geometry export and geometry connection and meshing capabilities if you're doing generative design topology optimization workflows. In the category of MSC Nastran, we did a lot of stuff under the hood, including having a new connector type, which is gap elements, long-standing request from our customer support, from our customers worldwide. And we also support anisotropic materials and variable pressure and temperature. 3 major key technologies for anybody using Nastran on a routine basis. Then in post-processing, we had 4 key improvements here. We have improved shear bending moment and torque charting. We also have Nastran Solution 111 support for frequency response dynamics. We have the ability to visualize and import the results from C-bush elements and springs. And then we have the API ability and the Nastran post-processing ability inside of static nonlinear for Solution 106 and 400. Now, again, that's just baby steps. That's not everything all encompassing for Solution 400, but just the beginnings of static nonlinear results are supported here. And then in terms of collaboration, customization, and automation, we have improved Apex utilities, including the ability to import Apex models from one into another, which is pretty cool. And then we have API support for regions, which again is similar to Patran groups. We're just getting started there. We will have full GUI support for that, but if you use the Python API inside of Apex, you can do that now using this release. And then we also have Mark Mentat support inside of Apex, where you can go directly from Apex, maybe do your geometry and meshing, and then you go directly into Mentat and Mark, and Apex will actually open up the application for you, just as you saw during that demo. Okay, so if you guys got any questions, or if this is creating any creative juices flowing in your brain and you want to ask us questions, this is how to contact us. Contact us immediately. Whenever you want to ask us that question, we would be happy to get back to you and set up a demo. No matter where you're at in the world, you have a local application engineer and an account manager. You have support that is local to your region, and we would be happy to set that up for you. All right. Thank you very much for your time. Please visit our website for anything additional, maybe some recent case studies or some past webinars that we've had. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.